Okay, good afternoon to the viewers of Venture Watch. And this episode, speaking to Ms. Gemma Whitehouse, the founder of Meditt. We're going to talk about 4 different things today with Gemma. We're going to get a brief overview of herself, and then we're going to look and talk about the company Meditt, and then take a look at its industry, and then conclude with a brief discussion about the whole issue and relationship between the pandemic and the taking off of telemedicine. So we hope you find this enjoyable. So welcome, Gemma. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for having me here.
Okay, looking forward to it. Why don't you start off and give the viewers a brief overview of yourself, both sort of your personal background, where you grew up, where you live, etc., and also your professional background, where you've studied and worked.
So, well, I'm a technology consultant, and I'm the founder of Meditt. I've worked for the last 15 years in technology, in a range of different roles, across different countries, across different industries. I guess I've mostly been focused predominantly on sort of product development and delivery-based transformation kind of projects. However, the last few years, I've actually been working in new business and emerging technologies and new business development. But originally, I actually grew up in the UK, and I actually studied classical music. And I actually got a scholarship very young, and I'd had another career by the time I was about 24, and then moved into technology after that. And I then moved to New Zealand and worked for some years, starting out in broadcasting and then moving into finance, always technology-based roles. And now I'm based, and last 7 years, in fact, based and working in Norway. So, yeah.
Very interesting. We've done lots of interviews with people in technology, but none of them have a background in classical music. So
I have found other people, actually. I found a very successful CTO at Fujitsu, who is actually a bassoonist. So we do get around.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
Not
So
completely.
you've told us a little about where you're traveling. Where are you personally located now, and is that sort of the registered address of the company Meditt as well?
Yeah, so currently Meditt is registered here in Norway. Right now I'm based in Bergen, but my intention is to move to Oslo, temporarily, at least for the time being. In terms of where I see myself ongoing, I mean, I see myself as being based in the Nordics and the UK. I mean, I've been here for some years, and I've built up all those connections, all those relationships. I think in terms of being where I am right now in Bergen, I mean, it's quite a small town. I mean, there's 250,000 people here. You really need to be in a bigger location in terms of connecting and evolving business propositions in this, especially in this sort of startup technology-driven sort of space. But I think really, in terms of the sort of broader picture, my view is that I've lived and worked internationally for years, and I'm sort of still excited about the sort of opportunities that are sort of out there in the wider kind of I don't know, business environment, and I think really the biggest business and possibly the most innovative opportunities lie probably outside the Nordics in that sense. So I think having come from a larger economy and having travelled pretty widely, I'm pretty open-minded, I guess, in that sense. But I feel I have good knowledge of the markets here. So
okay.
certainly my intention to exploit that and build on that.
Okay. So let's turn to the second section now and talk about the company, Meditt, M-E-D-I-T-T, and the asterisk is also formally part of its name. Is
yes,
that correct?
currently. It was just a sort of a branding kind of approach. I had some consultancy from a branding and strategy director, actually based in the UK, and they helped me form the initial kind of a brand approach and proposition in that way. So yes, that is correct.
Very interesting. So tell us how Meditt came to be and what your role in creating it was all about.
So Meditt originally started basically as my side project whilst I was working for Trygg Forsikring. Now Trygg is a They're a general insurer. They're the largest in Denmark, probably around the fourth largest, possibly the third now, after their recent merger here in Norway, and certainly the biggest now in the Nordics, in actual fact. I had been working there, developing new products and services, working on emerging technologies, focused actually on IoT, and looking at exploiting IoT for capturing of data in order to evolve sort of data-driven underwriting and tailoring of insurance products, but also to evolve sort of new, sort of innovative kind of customer kind of toolkits and products and propositions, mostly focused on real estate in actual fact. And so while I was working on these sort of product development projects, I actually had a terrible back injury. And through the whole experience of going through this sort of claim process of my injury and my rehabilitation, I realized that there was really a lot of things that could have been significantly improved. And I also started to think about how I might start to use some of the experience and the kind of tools and technologies that I'd been exploiting within real estate, actually to apply those to healthcare. So that led me to then undertake a customer study, and from that customer study there were some really clear pain points that emerged, and this is all pre-coronavirus pandemic, in actual fact. So so some of the things were like physical travel distance to see treatment specialists. And I mean, I'm living in Western Norway, you know, we've got ranges of mountains that get in the way. You can literally be driving 40 kilometers with a leg injury to see someone. I mean, you know, so there's some actual sort of practicalities for certain people in certain scenarios in that sense. There's also physical time to actually see someone, and the waiting time and the amount of paperwork that you might have to process, or waiting for an appointment, etc. But there's also some other very basic things like customers who sort of struggle to follow their treatment plan correctly, you know, keep up their treatment plan every day, and being offered sort of some kind of preventative treatment and support post your rehabilitation, and being encouraged also to sort of have those sort of healthy habits and you know, injury prevention ongoing. And of course, the customer is very, very motivated. They don't want to be injured, and they certainly don't want to be injured again. Once they've been injured, that's a very motivating factor, right? So there was a lot there that could have been improved, I felt. And with all the new digital therapeutics that were coming out on the market, there was definitely technologies out there to offer customers and to offer people who'd experienced what I'd experienced to improve that significantly. So the other thing really is also that the kind of entire value chain, and I think from my own experience and also from my own assessment of that professionally, the value chain currently is, you have your insurers who are sitting at the top, then you have your intermediary services who handle the claim for the customer, and then underneath that you'll have your clinics, and many of them are very small and they're run on a sort of local, you know, business level because they're local, of course, to the customers, and it's all nationwide. And then you have your customer underneath that who's been treated by the clinic. And I think the nature of that whole process right now is fundamentally quite administratively heavy and inefficient, ultimately. And the clinics themselves were often feeling that they are being squeezed by these larger sort of providers who are sitting over the top of them. So there was also possibilities to offer quite a lot of benefits to the clinics as well, and as well as passing a lot of money back to both the customer fundamentally, but also the insurer. So there was a lot really to kind of, I guess, kind of solve in terms of pain points at that point. So really, what I came out with ultimately was, in terms of Meditt's kind of new, I know, in terms of how to sort of approach and solve some of these issues. So right now, today, if we take an example from what exists, so if I'm a customer and I have an injury and I call the insurer, and then then that takes some data process, and that may be then sent on to an intermediary service to process that claim, who then pass that on to back to the customers, so they can book with one of the clinics that sits under this sort of umbrella service. Well, essentially what I've thought to do with Meditt was have a much faster and more efficient kind of proposition. So as I'm the customer, I have a claim, and I can triage this claim through a sort of chat-based kind of chatbot function, because there are a lot of sort of chatbot-based functions right now. They've been implemented in several different sort of certainly in public sector health, but also some private sector health through the pandemic, for the sake of triaging patients quite quickly. And you take an initial assessment, and that assessment basically says, okay, you are in a injury category that could be suitable for a telehealth-based treatment and service. You are trafficked thereby through to take a 30-minute assessment with a telehealth assessment within 24 hours. That has a mechanism to assess that you are appropriate for that service, and that you don't need to be physically seen. And that's quite an important sort of mechanism to build in. And assuming that you are appropriate for that you are then offered your treatment plan, you have your app that you can use to log your treatment, that you've done your program every day. You have some automated reporting back to the treatment professionals, so they can see you're following your treatment plan, and they have possibilities for intervention through that process. And you get benefits for sticking to that treatment plan, for filling out things like outcome measures, for taking preventative-based treatment. And the idea is to build in these sort of vitality health-based benefits through that process, but focus it on the rehabilitation as a sort of kind of first proposition. And that plays in very nicely to what the insurers and the clinics and the customers do right now today. But offers that sort of additional kind of hard incentive, I would call it, actually, which I feel is kind of in terms of driving user behaviour and driving that customer behaviour. That's quite important to have those things built in. And then from in terms of booking and the sort of clinical services, well, it's certainly possible now to automate a lot of the sort of invoicing, the claims management, booking for the customer, sending that through directly in an automated manner to the clinicians. Also have a booking proposition which allows the customer, first of all, to assess much more appropriately, because they will be given a list from the insurer. That will be the normal thing. So of different services, and maybe you've never had to book this type of service before, right? So you don't know what to find, or maybe you have a specific scenario where you want a specific type of treatment. One use case scenario that came up were from some of the customer studies that they undertook. Was one guy who'd had a terrible sports injury, and he wanted to find a sports specialist. Well, he ended up actually talking to people and finding out on Facebook in order to find this person, right? So, just for the sake of not having, that information collected in one place, that he could actually search it, find it, and find an appropriate treatment service. So that whole process is certainly something that can be improved. And then also the nature of complexity of people's injuries. They often touch on more than one service within that. And so there's quite a lot that you can kind of automate in terms of that whole sort of customer journey, that whole sort of customer flow. Okay. So fundamentally what Meditt is a sort of preventional toolkit and incentivizing kind of solution to offer behaviourally based benefits to the customer, and then a marketplace in order for both the clinics to find their customers and manage that much more efficiently, but also for customers to be able to search and book rated services in a much easier and more effective manner. And if you start to sort of think about some of the kind of possibilities for capturing data and how you might exploit the sort of experiential data you get through sort of that marketeers use, but also underwriters use, as well as the kind of data that your clinicians will need and require. There's quite a lot of possibilities as soon as you start to scale that type of marketplace proposition to actually offer a lot of benefit beyond the obvious cost reductions and the obvious kind of speed to treatment. And fundamentally, if you're building in hard incentives for customers to complete kind of rehabilitation programs, if you're offering a level of automation through that telehealth-based approach, you're getting significant reductions in sort of risk of re-injury and cost. And we've seen that through the studies that I've been collaborating with a couple of researchers on this proposition. And so there's clear evidence that that actually has a risk-reducing effect.
Okay.
And
let me ask a follow-up question just at
yeah.
this point, just to clarify it for me. So you've mentioned the four parties in the chain, the patient, the clinic, insurance company, and maybe some sort of intermediary between the insurance company and the clinic. What is your revenue model, and who is your paying customer? Who are you generating revenue from? Or maybe there's multiple customers.
So predominantly it's the private health insurance market. So it's your health, it will be your health insurers, or your general insurers with health insurance products that are your sort of primary customer. Ultimately, they have all of the contracts and ownership over all of the contracts with the clinics, which sit underneath them. So they are sort of your primary kind of sort of starting point, I guess. In terms of also all the other tools and services, and certainly my intention to build in toolkits for the clinicians. So there's a possible revenue stream there. At the moment, that's quite poorly handled on the market within Scandinavia. So there's certainly possibilities for that. In terms of the revenue model, it's a per. So I've worked out a per fee per claim revenue model. So every time a transaction is processed via the solution, we would just slice off a fee for that. And as soon as you start to scale that up and then you start to volumize, of course, then the fees, of course, go down. So that is obviously sort of quite incentivizing in terms of your being effective and your sort of cost optimization, I guess. And the more, of course, the customers that you add to that, you're getting an optimizing effect from that as well, of course. So, but I think there are also other possible revenue streams from that. But of course, then you need to start to scale before you get to that point. There's some sort of challenges, I think, from having worked within the insurance industry. I would say a lot of people who were sitting within sort of pricing and product-based kind of disciplines within insurance. Often you will see startups come in with and wanting to take a fee for offering the customer their new exciting app solution. And of course, for most insurers, they will just add that cost on and pass that down onto the customer. Well, that then makes that quite a difficult proposition to sell in. But if you're offering the sort of toolkits and benefits and the risk reduction, and then at the same time offering that kind of processing, which of course they already need, that's already within the existing ecosystem. You're just offering it an optimized sort of solution that hopefully will become a much more compelling proposition.
Okay, very interesting. So describe the company now, its facilities, its staff, its stage of development. Where are you in the whole development process?
So development process, so I mean, I've done quite a lot of work. So in terms of the kind of in terms of the sort of stage I'm at right now, I'm prototyping and testing essentially with customers. I've already had one prototype version out, and I've had a certain round of feedback from that. I'm now in a redesign process for the clinical solution part. in order that I can improve the incentives for them. I have a solution, I think, in terms of design. I just need to build it out. So we're very much in that sort of prototyping and testing kind of phase right now. In terms of all the service design and how that's all been mapped out, and doing a very thorough assessment of all the sorts of clinical solutions that we could integrate with out on the market. I mean, I've been working with a researcher who, here in Bergen, who also owns a small chain of physiotherapy clinics, and we've done a pretty thorough job, I would say, of redesigning that whole kind of servicing provision in order to optimize it. And we've actually done quite a bit of testing as well with her customers in order to kind of really identify solutions that we feel will really work. So now the challenge really is to get an insurer on board and actually start to scale up some of that prototyping and testing in order to evolve the product and service offering further. So it's very early stage right now, I would say.
So I noticed on your website there's two of you, you and the researcher you mentioned. I guess you're sort of co-founders, and there's an advisory board with 3 or 4 people, but I didn't notice any IT people or others. So have you been outsourcing that development?
Yeah, I mean, quite a lot of that is I've got 3 or 4 developers that I work with. I handle all the UX and service design myself. I've taken UX and service design training. In terms of the kind of provisioning, I mean, currently I've been picking up cloud engineering and solution architecture, so I certainly do the provisioning myself as well. That's no problem. So and certainly some of the build. But I have 3 developers that I collaborate with, and yeah, I mean, I'm largely self-funded. There is local funding available for startup-based propositions here in Norway, and it's certainly my intention to apply for some funds for this next phase, and also throw, of course, my own capital at evolving a proposition further to a more formal prototype stage.
At some point in time, you may need to add some people for business or market development when you start going out and trying to promote it, but it sounds like that's not quite yet happening.
No, I think so. The trouble with being in the healthcare and also in the insurance-based business is highly regulated, and there's an awful lot of work that you need to do in order to sort of prototype and evolve that proposition before you're kind of formally commercializing anything. And I've seen this with plenty of other businesses. I mean, it really does take some time. You know, you need, if you have anything which touches on clinical services, there's a certain amount of compliance there that needs to be assessed and formally ticked off before you can actually go out to market and really start selling. So there's a certain level of having to sell into the industry, and that before you can actually come out with a sort of commercialized proposition, and that is quite a process.
When do you think you'll get there? What is this, sort of like the start of next year? You'll be ready for commercialization? What's the time horizon?
The time horizon at the moment is that I will build up the new prototype over the summer. I need to confirm. I've had interest from the insurance market, but I need to actually confirm one to a business to sort of collaborate with to evolve the proposition further. And then I mean, in terms of the actual build, the build is relatively fast. In actual fact, I don't see the unless there's some sort of horrible technical kind of roadblock that I haven't anticipated, but I think it's unlikely given my level of experience. I don't see that as being a showstopper, really. I'm coming from a very sort of tech delivery based perspective, so I feel like I've got a really solid handle on that. So really, then it's just the business mechanics and the speed of which that can move that really is the thing that will kind of enable or kind of slow down any kind of commercialization. So I would certainly hope that next year I would be out in the market looking at that initial sort of proper commercial pilot test.
Okay.
But that's certainly my intention. But at the moment, I would certainly need to bring on a formal co-founder at that point. So
Okay.
yeah.
So the mention on your site of a potential co-founder, that will be slightly in the future, and the co-founder may be focused on the commercial development. Is that the alignment?
Well, from my own experience, I have to say, I mean, I've got I've got a number of sort of connections within the sort of startup environments, and I've met a number of people who've actually gone to a full pilot, or in fact, even one who runs quite a successful, profitable business, and he is looking for a sort of a CTO. So and hadn't actually hired someone. I mean, it took him 5 years to actually get to a point where he really needed to hire someone and have someone fill that role. So I think it can vary quite wildly depending on your specific situation as to how necessary that person is. I mean, as far as in terms of my position right now, what I believed was I could actually get through the pilot stage if I need to. And fund that with sort of other funding kind of sources myself, and that finding that the right person to come on board and support that process was more important than just finding someone to come on board that process. It's important that they have the right experience and knowledge and skills to kind of drive that forward and have enthusiasm for the product and in order to sort of take that forward, it's a huge amount of work and commitment, and you're possibly committed to that, of course, for years. Yeah. So you don't really want to get that wrong. So I think the answer really is that the inevitability of starting business is that it is a slightly fluid proposition in that sense, and I will bring someone on appropriately as soon as I sort of really reasonably can.
Okay. So let's combine and let's move to the third section about the industry, and let's talk about the first 2 bullet points. What industry sector do you classify Meditt in? And also, for your first stage of commercialization, what will be the extent of your geographic target market?
So how it would normally run with an insurer, you'd be looking, I mean, certainly here in the Nordics, you'd be looking at just testing with a few hundred people. Mm-hmm. If you were looking at a different, bigger market, I mean, that might be a couple of thousand if it was the UK, for example. And so you would be looking to run a limited pilot to start with. So you probably run that for around, I don't know, 6 months, probably. And at that point, assuming that was successful, you'd be signing a deal as a vendor, and then you'd be offering that out across the entire customer base. That would be a normal approach, I would say, for this market. So certainly that's what I've anticipated in all the kind of documents and planning and solutioning that and how I've built up the proposition so far. So I immediately I could test out the service provision. That would be fairly straightforward to take that on initially, and then add in all of the automation as you get further through the project and you actually start to prove that you can achieve exactly what you're selling in through that piloting process. So I would say that's broadly the process. Yeah.
With a focus in the first stage on the Nordic countries, that's going to be your initial target market?
Initial target market, yes, certainly. I mean, I've certainly also got in mind to take it and try and pitch it in the UK. I think the nature of the Scandinavian market, particularly if you're looking in Norway and Denmark, it's made up of a few big players who dominate the entire market. It's not like I can go around 40 different insurers. I mean, there's probably 5
Yeah.
here in Norway, or 6 or something. So you might not necessarily have the flexibility when you're trying to get that initial traction and just that initial engagement, in order that you can thereby prototype that proposition out and move forward in a bigger context, at least.
Is it hypothetically transferable to a very different market? For example, I speak with certain companies in the healthcare industry in the ASEAN countries, Southeast Asia. There's a lot of interest in telemedicine there. Could it hypothetically be delivered there with maybe a partner? Is it sort of a product that could work anywhere?
In my view, it certainly is. I also had considered even the public sector, but you have to be careful where you start. You have to focus on one area to start with. I did see a very similar concept and approach in Taiwan. They are at a relatively, they're certainly further on than I am, but they're a relatively early stage, and they have built out a marketplace proposition, doing a very similar kind of conceptual approach to what I had thought, in actual fact. And I thought it was very interesting that they had come up with a similar proposition, and completely different, the kind of part of the world, and completely different markets. I have no knowledge of that market, so it's very hard for me to sort of comment further. But
Yeah.
I certainly thought that was interesting. There was those possibilities out there. So I certainly believe it could be very relevant across different kind of international
Okay.
markets. Mm.
Okay. So I think you've answered the next question. Sort of the buyers, the customers are basically the insurance industry. So let's look at other aspects of the whole sort of Porter competitive strategy. Your key suppliers and main competitors, those two different sectors. What can you say about that within, say, the Nordic region, where you are starting off?
So in terms of competitors, there is one kind of main intermediary service which I modelled the original concept on, called Nordic Netcare. And they are effectively an outsourcing-based solution. They handle all of the claims, all of the invoicing. They also have a customer contact centre. So if you're an insurance customer and you have a claim, and you can actually call into their centre and be assessed by a nurse or a physiotherapist to assess whether your claim needs what sort of treatment or claim that you have. So, but my whole proposition is quite different, really, from their offering. I think the trouble with the Nordics is that because they are small markets, there isn't a significant amount of, from an insurer perspective, there's not a significant amount of choice of suppliers. If you're just looking within your home market, you have to look broader than that. But I think also that there are a number of businesses who are sort of looking in this sort of space, but they haven't evolved their proposition into it just yet. Yeah. So I think there's certainly a number of businesses that kind of, there was one, I think, is it called Leda Health? Or no, Lever Health, who they have a sort of a technology, digital therapeutics based solution. They are capturing that data and offering that back to the insurer. But the whole business model is completely different. They don't touch on the claims, they don't touch on the invoicing, or all of that sort of business to business based back office processing. So I think there's certainly, I think as those businesses evolve, of course, they will want to capture parts of that market. That's inevitable. In terms of where I am now, I've had some initial discussions with businesses called Cloud Insurance, who are based in Oslo. And my idea really was to be able to build my solution on top of their proposition. They have already a growing customer base of claims and invoicing customers, mostly within the insurance agents market. They have a big interest in the healthcare insurance healthcare market as well. That's a particular focus area for them. And it was certainly to work with a business like that, that would certainly de-risk my proposition. And obviously, in terms of you come out of capital you need up front for any sort of project-based initial kind of development, that also significantly reduces that. It's a huge amount of work in terms of build to process all of those invoices, all the claims. That's a lot of business logic to actually have to sort of create and build out. In terms of other businesses that I've been working with, propositions that we've sort of tested out as a number of clinical solutions in terms of offering digital therapeutics for rehabilitation. And it's certainly my intention to use my solution as a sort of mechanism to aggregate those other clinical solutions. One of the big challenges with the healthcare market is the fractalized nature of that, and the siloed nature of how the market operates. You've got, at the moment, lots of small startups doing lots of really exciting, innovative things. But as a customer, you may have a very specific need, and none of those things are sort of joined together. So really, any kind of marketplace-based proposition should be ultimately connecting all those things together. So we've tested out a couple of supply-based propositions. Reflex Help, who offer IoT-based solutions for rehabilitation of knee injuries specifically. Excel Live, who have a very heavy presence here in the Nordics. They're the primary supplier of physiotherapy-based and musculoskeletal exercise software. And a couple of others as well based in the UK. So all of these solutions have possibilities to sort of integrate and offer kind of benefits based on that as well. So
I've seen it in a lot of different industries we deal with. Healthcare, fintech as well, maybe some other advanced manufacturing where there's, as you said, a lot of big players, a lot of startups. And what we see is the big players starting sort of their own ecosystem where they may support some interesting startups, and it's sort of like outsourced research and development, and if the startup really works well, they may become a formal partner, or maybe even be acquired by the larger firm, because the nature of the industry means that it's very difficult for startups to survive alone. So perhaps a strategic partner is going to be an important part of the future for you. So then that comes to our last question in this industry, I think, about where do you see Meditt in 3 years' time?
Gosh, well, I certainly hope we will have run a successful pilot. I hope we will be rolling with our first couple of customers, or corporate customers. I certainly hope that would be the case. Yeah, I mean, in terms of bringing that to market and having tested out that sort of proposition, I certainly hope I would have a co-founding team on board to be driving that forward with me. So, I mean, I can't at the moment. It's too early a sort of stage to forecast too far into the future in a sort of concrete way, because you have to be iterating and you have to be testing things out, and you have to be justifying your position and your proposition at each stage in order that you can thereby sell it in. So, but in 3 years, I certainly hope that I would be live with my first couple of customers and be looking to scale.
It's almost like they used to teach us in basic math about conditional probability. You know, you can say, I want to be here, but, you know, this outcome and this outcome has to happen first. And so I think you've defined your first key outcome, which is achieving the start of a commercialization process by the start of the next year. And then if you do that, then you set your next outcome. So it's, I often say it's one day at a time. I guess in your business it's maybe 1 year at a time.
Yes, it maybe doesn't move as fast in very highly regulated markets, unfortunately. It's not really a case of move fast and break things.
Okay.
It's not really the same speed to market that you would expect in a sort of direct B2C based product proposition. All right,
Yeah.
so it's just the nature of it. So yes.
So let's let's go to the fourth stage, which is sort of a case study. And I know in our previous conversation, you were talking a lot about the pandemic and telemedicine. Give us some thoughts on that area. How has it slowed down your business development? Has it given new opportunities? How does your business and the pandemic relate and impact each other?
Well, I think it's obviously been a complete game changer for telemedicine. I mean, prior to the pandemic, it was slow to sell these sorts of propositions in, and having met a lot of other businesses in the same kind of space. I mean, certainly it's a broadly a shared experience in terms of sort of that initial traction prior to the pandemic, and of course then the pandemic arrived, and now we've seen a huge explosion in growth. However, I do believe there's an awful lot of areas that simply haven't been touched yet. I also think that there's still a lot of resistance to change, actually, and that people have this belief that okay, we're still waiting it out, and things are going to just go back to normal at some point. It's been interesting looking at the insurance market in terms of musculoskeletal injuries, particularly, which is where I started the Meditt proposition. I mean, Meditt fundamentally, the whole kind of approach is that I needed to start with one kind of specific area and tailor my proposition to that, and then scale out across, of course, the other kind of injury categories and treatments and services. Mm-hmm. But in terms of musculoskeletal injuries, the insurers have seen a massive drop, actually, in musculoskeletal injury claims. Mm-hmm. Now, this was an absolutely huge chunk of their claims base, something like 60% in the Nordics or something, for orthopedic and musculoskeletal problems. It's a huge amount of their outgoing costs in that area each year. Now, it's not to say that people aren't still getting injured. That's not to say that people don't still have ergonomic problems, but they're frightened, of course, stuck in lockdown, to go to any kind of see a physician, and they're worried about catching coronavirus. There and a lot of these, particularly small clinics, who are often the majority who's servicing people in these sorts of injury kind of categories, they have really struggled actually with finding the right sort of tools, technologies. They don't have any kind of technical knowledge or background themselves. They're clinicians. That's their focus and their training and their expertise. And so there has been some real challenges actually with them even servicing people that have got injuries. So I think there's actually sort of a bubbling sort of time bomb in a way, particularly within the musculoskeletal injury category, that people have potentially got chronic injuries that they're sitting on because they weren't able to or worried about sort of processing a claim or something like that. So I think that's quite an interesting sort of industry kind of dynamic. And I also think that in terms of how the market's responded, we're seeing big traction with platforms like Teladoc. Mm-hmm. But for example, amongst many others, a huge explosion of growth across some of these sort of startup-based propositions. But I think fundamentally, if I'm just a local, if I'm here in Bergen, where I am right now, I want to go and see the doctor or the treatment specialist that is local to me, that knows me, that I have that relationship with. Teladoc doesn't offer that right now. Mm-hmm. They're not offering mechanisms for local businesses. So I wonder whether they're post-pandemic that we might see those sorts of businesses losing traction as some of the rest of the market actually starts to catch up, and it starts offering better tools and services to some of these smaller businesses. I think that could be quite an interesting industry shift. So I think in terms of my where I'm sat now, And what I'm thinking about in terms of the proposition, of course, I'm seeing all this, and I've identified these gaps, and I mean, I certainly have. I believe I've come up with a solution that would sort of fill some of those gaps, and offer a better kind of proposition in terms of those sort of small local clinics and those kind of mechanisms which fundamentally exist right now and aren't being serviced well enough, even though we've seen explosive growth. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting point. I mean, where I'm sitting in Asia and China, we've seen situations where very large, mostly technology companies, but not exclusively, who've got a lot of money, have decided that, okay, we've got the technology, we know technology is important for healthcare and for finance, so we're going to jump into there, throw a lot of money, create some big platforms, but they're not historically knowledgeable about the healthcare, the dynamics, or the finance industries. And so you get a lot of big platforms going out that, because the small ones don't have the capital or it's don't have the time so far, they put out these very generic solutions that are not ideally what the customer wants. So I think that there's either room for smaller providers with real deep industry experience to go there, or these big tech companies need to partner with companies like yours and others who really have the expertise so that they can take their capital and technology and really create something, as you've described, that the industry has really needed. So I think there's either room for new players to come in or for startups to partner and really fine-tune these big platforms into something that's much more what the ultimate patient or clinic wants. That's just been my sort of impression so far.
Yeah, I
Oh,
completely agree. I completely agree. That certainly chimes with a lot of what I've seen out on the market as well. So.
okay. Well, that was the end of my scheduled questions, and I always finish with the same question comment, and that is there anything you would like to add that perhaps I didn't think to ask you about or raise or comment on before we close out?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity, and it's been great to talk to you today and to talk about Meditt. And I mean, I'm very excited about and fascinated about learning about new markets and possibilities, particularly out in places like Hong Kong, China, other parts of Asia. I mean, I haven't lost my thirst and curiosity about the world, and I'm very excited about business and technology, of course. So yes, so thank you
Great.
very
So
much.
we'll be promoting this on a great number of social media, and hopefully someone will be watching it out in another part of the world and see some sort of potential collaboration, because at the end of the day, this is to provide interesting news for readers, but also to sort of expand the network of startups or SMEs, which by definition tend to be a little bit more regional in their focus. So hopefully this opens up some new doors down the road for us. So thank you very much for your time, Gemma. It's always interesting for me. I have just a very general business background, so learning more about healthcare IT is always fascinating, and I'm sure the viewers will find it as well. So thanks for your time today.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.